All right. So my name is Chantalie Kander, and I am joined here with Christine Gelineau, who is a writer who writes between both prose and poetry. And thank you so much for joining us for Sign and Breath.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate being part of this project.
Absolutely. So we'll start with you reading your poem, and then we'll get into a little bit of a conversation.
All right, sounds good. Sounds good. So this is titled, rather elaborately, Poem from My Brother on the occasion of his daughter's wedding. Our daughters have become orchards, petaled and fragrant as light. In the agile branches, brash song and incandescent orioles. It is their turn to be divine now, while we grow more mortal every day. We wake to the ash of dreams upon our tongues and catch the intermittent scent of accidents and inevitable calamities we have yet to suffer. Yes, our throats swell with the vibrato of everything we've been compelled to know. But today, beneath the red-nippled trees, long-haired meadow grasses shiver and daffodils gesture the lithe hands of their fronds. Let the heart twist like the flower breaking into blossom. Lasting is not all.
It's interesting because, and I know this is going a little bit off script with the question, talk to me a little bit about that piece. What I love about it is it mixes the whole question of mortality, right? Like here it is, on a wedding day, someone has their life ahead, and it causes almost an occasion for thinking about life lived. What's some more about the inner workings of that piece?
Yeah, my niece was getting married in Provence, a small wedding that my brother and sister-in-law and her sister and a couple of her friends were invited to, but the rest of us weren't. So there was this family wedding with my brother's oldest daughter, and I'm thinking of them, and I thought I'd be writing it to Amy, Beth, and Pierre, but instead I found I was really writing it to my brother. And my brother, this niece was born the same summer that my daughter was born. So there was that feeling of that we're the generation, so I think that's how mortality came into it, is that I found myself really writing it more to my brother than to the bride and groom. But I think it focuses then back on, to stop thinking about mortality and to live in this moment and to appreciate this moment, because lasting is not all.
Absolutely. And what motivated you to choose this piece for the anthology?
I think I actually had difficulty deciding which piece to choose, but I was looking for a piece that, how we sometimes say, well, oh, that's poetry, whether it's poetry or not, in the way that it's laid out on the page. And I wanted something that, irrespective of how it would be laid on the page, that it would have enough of those musical elements that people would feel that way, hopefully, about that piece. And so we have all of those open vowels of, the different daughters, orchard, agile, incandescent, orioles, brash. All those open vowels have that feeling of lushness and plenty, I think, that gives us, is one of the musical elements in the piece. I think rhythmically that we, there's the sort of the building complexity of the syntax in the lines. We wake to the ash of dreams upon our tongues and catch the intermittent scent of accidents and inevitable calamities we have yet to suffer. Yes, our throats swell with the vibrato of everything we've been compelled to know. And then at the word but today, beneath the red-nippled trees, long-haired meadow grasses shiver and daffodils gesture the lithe hands of their fronds. It sort of untangles the syntax and, slows the rhythm in that way. And then finally, the even simpler, more direct so that it almost feels, the syntax gives this feeling of that this is the sureness of what little sureness is there. This is what we're sure about, is that this moment, in this moment of celebration and wedding and springtime, that the fullness of that moment is what matters. And so, I felt that the music of the language helped to enact the meaning of the poem. And that's why I chose it.
How does this page represent your practice in terms of how you tend to think about syntax and the turns and the movement of all that you just described?
So I would put that with, one of the questions that you had suggested might be part of it was, how does orality or voice play a role in the composition? And I would say, I would have like a two-part response to what you said and to sort of that idea. And my mother's parents were both born in Ireland. My grandmother was born in the Gaeltacht, meaning Irish was her first language. And so though she spent most of her life in Massachusetts, for all of her life, she spoke with a soft brogue, which, brogue actually means a rude shoe. And the OED is kind of the Oxford English Dictionary. It's a little dicey, but they say, well, maybe it meant, maybe they were insulting them. It's like, yes, they were insulting them. But to me, it was such a beautiful music, the way my grandmother spoke. My father's first language was Quebecois French. He didn't learn English first. Both of his parents, he was French Canadian, though he was born in the United States, as were his parents. But my Meme and Pepe always spoke English to us children, to the grandchildren, but to their friends, they'd speak French or this, mix that they called franglais, with the emphasis on the French part of it. And then in addition to that, well, for one thing, I was raised to be Catholic and sent to Catholic school. And so every Sunday at Mass, I'm old enough, the Mass was still said every Sunday morning in Latin. I sang in the choir, Gregorian chant in Latin. And I lived in a landscape marked by the Algonquin language. Mashannocket, Misquamicut, Narragansett, Papaneset, Mashpee, Apponaug, Sauconasset. So I was, my childhood was filled with the sounds of languages that I could repeat, that were within me, but that I would not be able to write down. There are a couple words I still can't even find on Google, like what's a bookie roll? I know what a bookie roll is, but I still can't spell it. So from the earliest times, I think language was both communication and music. It was meaning, and it was oral delight. It was practicality and ritual, so that it's a tool, but it's also magic. So that'd be the first sense in which I'd say orality for me is at the center of composition. And then to speak even more directly to what you asked about syntax and all, the second sense would be to do with incarnation, with embodying the word. So that tradition that I was raised in has a Godhead that speaks the world into being, and who talks about at least one aspect of the Godhead as being the Word made flesh. And to me, orality is when words bring the body, the mind, the heart, if it's all seamlessly enmeshed, that to me is, orality. My other passion besides poetry is horses and riding horses. I find a real apt parallel to composition. So riding is this language that you speak with your whole body to another species. And it's a kind of cross-species sign language, you could say, in which the most significant of the signs is touch, the weight of your body, the feel of your leg, the touch of your hand. And it's the opposite of the cerebral language. It is so bodily, and it's full of subtlety, rhythm, attention, kind of simpatico for this other being that is not of the same species as you. And what certainly what I have learned about a fluency in this language of writing, I do my best to try to put it into the language of my poems and essays also in ways that seek to incarnate orality, even to writing that's intended to be there on the page. If I could just, I want to just talk a little bit, I'm not sure if you were going to ask about how one can bring aspects of orality to the page.
Yeah, I was actually going to adjust the question a little bit because I'm very curious about, given that you have the Catholicism, so there's language that's like liturgical, or like hearing, the Latin, you talk about writing and the body and then the movement of body in your work. I'm very curious as to how all these different things, including orality to the page, but then the other part of that question is definition of voice. How for you does voice take on these different levels of meaning, given there's a physicality to what you're describing?
Right, right. One of the early influences for me in my early 20s was reading William Carlos Williams's Spring and All, that book, that genre of, blending early book that would mix poetry and prose and diary entries and letters and, that sort of collaging of different materials that could spark off of one another and that were not necessarily linear. So that I got through that and through when I was an undergraduate at the University of Connecticut. Charles Olson actually was technically employed he was sick at the time, but I did work with sort of the George Butterick, who was this Olson acolyte who had followed him there to UConn. And that sense, from that point on, I had a sense of the page as it being white space and words, that there be a choreography of the page, that there was a way to bring bodiliness to the page in that way, to be able, just as in choreography, you can suggest movement and change and relationship by spatial placement. And once I'm old enough, I started composing, I started writing before there were computers to do it on. But once, and I never, composed on the typewriter, but once there's something sort of liquid and deep about the computer screen to me that felt like a place where that kind of movement could bring embodiment. And to me, I would think of that as voice. When you can, on the page, bring performance is great. It's a great advantage. You get to bring your personality, your voice, your inflection to the work. When, I guess I would say, to me, voice would be when you can bring enough of that to the page so that even when you aren't there, the reader can access a good portion of what they would get if you were there. To me, that would be voice.
Wow.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, well, it's funny. I always say when people ask if it answered my question, does that feel like it conveyed what you wanted to define as voice? Because I feel that was very clear.
Yeah. Oh, I hope it conveys it. It conveys it to me.
Yeah. Is there, as we wrap, is there anything else you want to add? Or a question I perhaps didn't ask that you would like to address?
I guess there was a question about genre, and I was interested in that, and I'm not sure that I am totally at ease with my own response to that. I think I need to think that through even more. In a way, as the writer, there's a way in which you can just ignore that. to me, in a sense, genre has to do with publishing, whether it's performance is your publication or the page in a book is your publication. That's sort of the point at which you have to figure out what does this look like and how is that going to translate over to the audience, whether the audience is a reader or someone there. So there's a, form, that's form. Genre is form, right? It's how are you going to shape it so that you can transmit it to someone else. And I am very interested in, sometimes people see form as limiting, but I think of it more as skeletal, where the skeleton enables and articulates and makes something possible. And yes, I mean, the skeleton of a rabbit can't, graze the top of acacia trees, and the skeleton of a giraffe can't shoot into a hole to get away from predators. But that does not necessarily, I wouldn't focus on that limit. I would focus rather on that articulation and that ability and that motion and liveliness that the skeleton can enable.
Thank you so much.
That would be how I would, think about. Genre doesn't matter when I'm writing necessarily, but it does matter when you want to bring it to the world.
Thank you so much, Christine. This has been a pleasure talking with you.
Oh, it's been a pleasure to have this opportunity and to get a chance to speak with you.